distant drumming awakened me. Whispers from an unknown origin calling my name, beating inside my soul, calling me, pulling me to a place I've never known. The pulse, even now, echoes inside my mind. The spirit dances in new ways. The whispers entrance me with their sound, as ancient as all the yesterdays of the universe. They create an awareness I cannot fully comprehend, an excitement I cannot control, a yearning I dare not ignore. They say, go to the place where tomorrow is born, the place where eternity awaits the undoing of today's dilemmas. Go to the place, they say, where the answers to the questions of time are lost amidst dreams, never to begin again. Go to the place where footprints sealed in the sands of yesterday, unearthed, reveal a reality preordained by the designer of destiny and fate. The echo of distant drums call my name. They await the day I answer their call. The whispers entreat me to come. Come, they say, come, discover why you are here.
Hello, and welcome to Sojourn with Words, the poetry program for Prince George's County and the poets in the area. Today, we have a wonderful poet whose name is Edgar Gabriel Silex. I'm your host, Sistah Joy, and I'm looking forward to, along with you, finding out more about Mr. Silex. But one of the things that I can truly, claim right now is that I've had the privilege of hearing him a couple of times. His poetry is very intense. I recall one of the first times I heard his poetry, I literally was stopped in my tracks. I was doing something and thought I was going to just listen while I worked. Didn't work that way. He's commanding an audience, and I'm very honored to have. Welcome, Edgar.
Thank you very much.
Very, very happy to have you with us. Now, let me share a few things about Edgar Gabriel Silex, because he is absolutely credentialed and published and award-winning and all of that. Let's see. Cum laude graduate of University of Maryland, University College, and received an MFA in poetry from the University of Maryland. He's the author of two poetry collections from Northwestern University Press, Through All the Displacements and Acts of Love. And there's also a chapbook, Even the Dead Have Memories. Now, there's so many, let me not stop there. Through All the Displacements was nominated for the National Book Award, and Acts of Love was a finalist for the National Poetry Series. So there are so many recognitions. Truly, you have more than arrived. You have placed a marker to which many aspire. So it is our privilege and honor to have you here today on Sojourn with Words, and I look forward to having our guests to hear your poetry as well as learn a little bit about you. You did receive also some fellowships. Let's see, there's the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and an artist grant from Maryland State Arts Council, and on and on. So we know that for persons that are interested in securing your books, they'll be easy to find. We know that also you've been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. So that's absolutely one of those high honors. I'm going to stop reading because there'd be too much for me to try to carry all of your credentials through this brief amount of time that we have. But the poetry that you write speaks of culture, speaks of family, speaks of struggle, but also speaks of love. I'd like for you to perhaps tell us, what is it that brings you to that place of, well, deciding not just what to write about, but how to write about it? What's your inspiration and motivation?
I started writing actually because when I was a little kid, my grandmother would listen to this radio station in Mexico. We lived in Texas, so we could pick up, the signals. So she would listen to this poetry program, and she loved poetry. I was a little kid, she was raising me. So as soon as the program came on, she stopped doing everything, ran to her living room, and they would have like contests, like, they would use a line or a few words of a poem, and they would ask the audience, if you can figure out who wrote this, the first caller is going to win, a case of Coke or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And she would run her books and start flipping and looking for the poems, and sometimes she had them memorized, and so I was fascinated by her enjoyment of it and by the language, how much she loved the language of poetry. So I think that's initially where I started, sort of playing with words. And I would walk around. Sometimes they would have these words that I didn't know what they meant, but they were very musical, if you will. And I would love the way they sounded on my mouth. So I would walk around singing them and repeating them.
True wordsmith. Okay.
Yeah. So that's actually where I started, and so as I grew up, I started writing more and more, but I think the thing that really drives me now to write poetry is I react to the world around me.
Okay.
So I'm somebody who has to find my own understanding of the world, or how I feel about things by writing it down.
Now, one of the things that's a common thread in your poetry, or at least to me, you address the issue of forgiveness through poetry. Talk about that.
Okay. Well, for me, I find, and I've said this in many other places when I do readings, is the Greeks invented like 5 different kinds of love. They sort of categorize the different kinds of love, filial love, maternal love, eros, those kinds of love. So I always thought that they left one out. And I always feel that forgiveness is really the highest form of human love. Oh, okay. And I always say that it is because it is the most difficult kind of love. It is a love that comes after you have loved something and you have unloved it, that has destroyed you, that has leveled you, if you will, spiritually, and you have to forgive it. And the only way you can forgive it is to love it again. So it's a very difficult kind of love. So you're speaking
of forgiveness after love.
After
because
love.
There are other forgivenesses that may be possible that never merited love.
Well, I think all forgiveness does merit love.
Really?
Yes. Because in order to forgive, you, in a sense, have to disarm that which needs forgiveness.
Okay. I'm going to think on that.
You have to disarm it, and once you disarm it, then you're able to open yourself up again, which is really what you're trying to do. You're trying to it blocks you from wanting to accept more things.
Well, I absolutely understand the freeing nature of forgiveness. It's a powerful gift for the giver, and I totally agree with that. Well, okay, so now some of the themes of science and philosophy and your poetry are not always issues that we see in poetry. It's almost like left brain, right brain kind of thing. Yeah. What brings you to that in your poetry?
I started out as physics major.
Oh, okay.
When I was in college, and I worked as a satellite. I worked on satellites as an engineer.
Okay.
So I helped build lots of the satellites in the Western world, actually, with some of my friends, and not friends, but I worked for Hughes Aircraft, satellite and communications.
Right. Okay.
So science was a major part of that, and you know, we sent satellites off to, you know, Saturn and Venus, and I worked on one that mapped the entire planet of Venus. You know.
Right. Okay.
So
Well, it's interesting. I was on the federal government side, so I worked with FCC and authorizing those satellites.
okay. Yeah.
These other lives that we had, but interesting. Yes. Okay. Well, now when you let's see, there's a couple of poems that I really would like for you to speak of, and hopefully have a chance for you to share with our guests, with our viewers today. The poem, oh my goodness, I wanted to talk about The Shadows of Words. That poem, it struck me. I read it again and again. Could you talk about it, both its inspiration, but also what is your ultimate statement through that poem? And maybe we could have our guests, have our viewers to listen to the poem first.
The shadows of words. I can't imagine a mother calling her child that. I remember I used to fumble my words, shy away, always feigning ignorance. I'd laugh at anyone who would even want to talk to me back when I'd grown dark enough to understand why the cops would pull me off the sidewalk and ask where I was going. Nowhere, sir, I would stutter, even as I knew what I just said would make them laugh and wink at each other. Even though I knew I could walk down any street, even some they'd never go to. Through my memory, I saw that child catching her words whenever I raised my voice or spoke directly to her, or when she pretended not to know how to add, subtract, or push a button on a register, or the least thing about the subtleties in human language. Anything that required confidence. I felt that word lingering in the way she cast her eyes, in her supplicated smile that touched me like a burning memory I am ashamed of, and in the way it shied behind the reasons why we loved each other. I would try to encourage her, demonstrate how she could do things for herself, ask for raises, find out how she could finish college. An educated professional, years later, her mother's voice would wax and she'd curl up to me too much. And I couldn't shake her. I couldn't figure out what made me finally overcome that feeling some cops and fathers leave you with. Sometimes I fall momentarily back to that young man who chased cum laude degrees through half my life, and still I feel those cops and that word that they didn't even have to say, like I imagine her mother often did.
The Shadows of Words, that title
Yes.
has a lot of meanings for me, because when I was a graduate student at the University of Maryland, I did not like that they did not invite a lot of minorities to read. So I I was assistant administrator there. And so I talked to my boss and I said, you mostly invite white men and white women to come read. How come you don't get other people to come? So I started my own reading series there.
Okay.
It was called The Shadows of Words.
Okay.
And I invited Native American people and Hispanics and people to come read, other people, African American people to come hold readings. It was a student-led reading series. So so that's where that first term came from. But it has to do in this poem. I always thought about that term, shadows of words, because words have a lot of layers. Obviously, they can connote and they can be defined, all these, they can have pejorative senses, all these.
Yeah.
And those are their shadows. And indeed, when I wrote this poem, I was thinking about a friend of mine who I used to live with, and she had a lot of problems, emotional scars, I would say.
Okay.
And she loved language also. She was a poet as well as an artist. But she had a lot of issues with her life. So that she was the inspiration for that.
Okay.
And I never say the word.
Right. I know. That's why I kept reading it. I said, am I missing something?
Yeah.
Well, that's a powerful poem. So we're going to hear that and plenty more. When we talk about you as a poet, certainly Lucille Clifton has been recognized as one of your influences and who was a dear friend of yours. So how wonderful was that? Talk about those poets and those sources of inspiration.
Well, I think for me it was, I started out probably reading, my favorite poet when I was really young. When I was 14, I was starting to write serious poetry. Was Khalil Gibran. I read a lot of Gibran. But then when I started really getting into serious poetry, I had Joy Harjo and Pablo Neruda are probably the two biggest influences on me. And then later on, I started working with Lucille. And Lucille's work became extremely important to my life. In fact, she used to challenge me, Edgar, you can never write a short poem.
That's a challenge for many of us who love words. Okay.
So I started to write short poems because of that. But Lucille, and I think Adrian Lewis now is another poet that I am highly influenced by. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know there was a poem, The Bird Bath, which I'm hoping our guests, our viewers will hear today as well. But certainly your poetry has touched many parts of my soul, because it is not just poetry to skim through. I dare not say, for your poetry, even as I'm looking at your book, the dog-eared corners of your book, anybody who reads your books, they're going to be that way, because it requires another layer. The onion has to be peeled, and that is truly the mark of wonderful poetry.
Thank you. That's a very nice compliment.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very honored to have the ability to present you to our viewers here on Sojourn with Words. And the poetry tonight, well, the poetry today will be poems that reflect on culture, reflect on family, on healing, and certainly on aspirations. So thank you for being with us today. I'd like to say that, can you give us information about how our viewers can get in touch with you?
Well, I don't self-promote very much, so I just, people who look online.
Is there a website?
I do have a website. I don't know what it's called. It's like Blogger or something.
You said you don't self-promote.
Yeah.
Well,
but you can just Google me, and you can get books from either Northwestern University Press, or you can find me on Amazon.
How about we take a break, and we'll come back, and our viewers will have a chance to hear the wonderful poetry of Edgar Gabriel Silex. Stay tuned. Don't go away.
Wants to hear a story.
Once upon a time, there were 3 billy goats.
The tiniest billy goat grunt.
The biggest billy goat grunt. Roared the troll. It's all ugly troll. Their eyes as big as saucers.
And the billy goat was so heavy that the bridge
Way up was a bridge they had to cross. And under it, why, thank you.
For a mother, I was given madness. For a father, I was given absence. They raised me unclothed in the mirrored houses of loneliness. I learned to play with my voices, which I named God and contradiction. We lived in reservations, my brothers and sisters, who threw knives at their sad reflections. To laugh, we learned to cry, then we laughed at everything. The world was nearly 500 years old then, and had the illusion of being white and clean. God and contradiction were the first to teach me a game of forgiveness they called survival. Theory of mind. Theory of mind is an area of research that studies human development, especially moments of human maturity that we all go through in our lives. That look in her 18-month-old mind, the instant in which the world is fashioned beyond simple acts of sticking everything in her mouth, and her face is studying yours when suddenly her eyes see past all the physical discoveries of things that occupy her days, that keep you thinking for both of you, so much that you realize just how much fun and exhausting it is to always be alert to your world and hers. And in that moment when you ask her to stop shaking the milk out of her bottle because she's getting it all over the floor, she stares straight at you just long enough for you to see, all the way back to Eden, to those glorious fecund fields. Then you watch as she slowly aims the nipple towards the floor, and you can almost hear the gates slam shut as she deliberately dribbles a few more drops of milk on her breakfast, still littering the kitchen floor. And she keeps her eyes on you and you on hers, and that different smile appears out of the universe of contradiction across her pink round cheeks, till finally you cannot help but smile with her, and you begin to laugh together. She's giggling and laughing because she just found out she is in control of herself, and because she is, she's no longer doing just as you say. And you're laughing because you realize her love just became conditional, and because you really don't know how many contradictions it takes to bring one human into being. The bird bath, 1. When I first carved the bird bath from a huge tear-shaped stone I found in the New Hampshire woods, I thought it must have split in half the night before I stumbled upon it, like a ripe pink granite egg or fruit. The world had hatched into 2 perfect tears. I tried taking them both, but one was too heavy for me to carry the 50 feet to my car. So I left it there where it fell out of the igneous soul of earth. And when I got the other home and tore into that pink bespeckled flesh, chiseling out the biotite and feldspar with 8-pound hammers, I carved a shallow tear-shaped bowl for rain to fill, and didn't give one thought to that act of making something out of the flesh of tears you found while walking in the woods alone. 2. The granite bird bath I carved reminds me anger can make lasting things. I didn't know how much I love birds when I carved the granite bird bath. This tear-shaped granite bird bath fills with rainwater that cleanses feathers. One by one, the birds take turns. A robin waits for a flinch to finish. You learn to hit things hard and not break or shatter your spirit carving. How long will it outlast me, this bird bath I carved a lifetime ago? As long as there's storm, no man need fill it or watch birds bathing in it. On the surface floats a feather that's forever falling from the sky.
Well, that concludes today's episode of Sojourn with Words. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed our guest as much as I have. And remember to look up his books, both in libraries and at your favorite bookstore. I'm Sistah Joy. Be in touch. Let us know what you think. This is Sojourn with Words right here on CTV in Prince George's County.
When I was a young girl down the island way, my grandmama, she look at me and say, how you gonna conquer the world with a drain in your brain, ha, and a hole in your soul? Then she laugh and say, girl, go to school, learn, get smart, don't be nobody's fool. Play fair, work hard, and then she say, then show others how to. That's how you live the good life. Grandmama, she say, dare to care, learn to share, reach for the top in all you try and do. Learn to console your friends when they fail or lose, and learn to let them console you too. That's how you live the good life. Always, always respect yourself and your family. Be the brightest blossom, the richest seed, the strongest root on the family tree. That's how you live the good life. My grandmama should say, earn your way to a better tomorrow, one that's brighter than today. Touch a life, right or wrong. Learn to say, learn that gentle, yes, gentle is sometimes tougher than strong. She say, a warm smile opens doors faster than most keys, and that be true in life. I don't care where you be. Don't you want to be living the good life? Girl, she say, learn to trust. Above all else, that's a must. Drink and savor the sweet nectar of life. One day, she say, one day, you'll be someone's partner or wife. Learn to love deep. Learn to love strong. Learn that you can't go throughout life doing other people wrong. Fight fair for what you want. Forget the meaning of fear. Learn to work through your pain. Claim your victories, then step back and watch them appear. Now this is when you know you be living the good life. This is what my grandmama told to me. She said, read your Bible each and every day. Give thanks to God. Yes, let Him show you the way. Take comfort in knowing He'll always be there, and never get too old to fall down on your knees in prayer. Be thankful even for tests of today and tomorrow, because without yesterday's test, tomorrow's testimonies can't follow. Now that's how you conquer the world and get rid of that drain in your brain and that hole in your soul. That, my child, is how you live the good life.
I stroll along the beach, stooping occasionally to retrieve a cowrie shell. The waves seem to laugh as they splash, frolicking about my feet, snickering, sharing secrets of freedom and time, dancing with the sands and the wind, sharing secrets I long to know. As the tide ebbs, I note the sun's glow upon the darkened sand. How quickly the glistening grains grow warm, then regain their glow. How they shimmer in the noonday sun, like my own sun-kissed skin. Collectively, these tiny grains withstand the tide. Those that chose to float free become lost, swept away into the sea of yesterday. But these tiny sands stand strong. Like family, they cling to one another. Their bond is strong. Shored with the strength of unity, they are transformed into a firm foundation. During my childhood years,